Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for waiting, and we're ready to kick off this next panel discussion. And it's one I'm incredibly excited about. It's about Web3 and immersive working. So my name, as Laura mentioned, is Rory Daniels. I'm techUK's Senior Program Manager for Emerging Technologies, and I sit within our technology and innovation team. This is a topic that's particularly close to my heart, as it's the focus of our current what we call sprint campaign, so a 6-month campaign exploring the future of Web3 and immersive technologies, where the UK sits within the landscape, what more government and businesses can do to ensure that we lead on the development, application and commercialization of these technologies. A few things to point out before we dive straight into the discussion. The first is, as Laura mentioned, to give a big shout out to our tech demo exhibitors, which are in rooms 3 and 4 and a room a bit further around the corner. So that's River, BCVR, MX Reality and Arcadia, and also to UKRI for coming and kind of bringing a stand. So do reach out to them during the break, the lunch break, which is straight after this. Try all the cool tech, AR, VR tech, and kind of network that way. Also worth mentioning that River, one of those companies, will feature in a Meet the Innovators episode. So it's our monthly video interview series, all about innovation. And so if you want to check out their HQ and their products and exactly what they do, watch out for that on our Innovation Hub in the next few days, because that will go live. And finally, we have a filter, an AR filter, that you can use to share your experience of the summit. There's a QR code right as you go into the kind of where all the food and the drinks are, but come and find me as well. I can share it with you, and you can share that directly with socials. But it's quite appropriate for an immersive panel and our tech demos. So this session will explore the future of Web3 and immersive technologies and the implications they are likely to have on the world of work. I'll be asking our panelists kind of what these technologies will be, how they'll feel for people, for human users that are expected to interact with them, where the UK is on the development and application of them, and crucially, what more we should be doing to get all of that right. So without further ado, I'll very quickly allow our speakers to introduce themselves, and then we'll go straight into the discussion. So Vicky, I'll start with you.
Hello everyone, it's fantastic to be here. So my name is Vicky Williams. I'm a Policy and Partnerships Manager, and I work with the CoStar Foresight Lab. So I know UKRI are in the building today. We are the first sort of significant funded programme, CoStar, which has a really convoluted name, but the co is for convergence, which is what I'm going to come back to. But our remit is we are a UK-wide R&D network for creative technologies, encompassing everything from how the creative industries are using and adopting XR, immersive technologies, all things through to AI as well. So we're a relatively new network, and the Foresight Lab are responsible for looking at the next 10 years and all the trends that are emerging across some sectors like film, TV, video games, and live performance. Prior to that, I was working at the Digital Catapult, which is an innovation centre doing a lot of work in immersive technologies. And I also did my PhD on immersive tech. So really happy to be here and talk more about all the fun stuff about immersive technologies.
Thanks, Vicky. Cami.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cami Rincon. I'm a senior researcher at the Ada Lovelace Institute, and I'm currently leading on a research project focused on exploring immersive technologies and their regulatory implications. So our goal with the project is really to provide regulators with the resources to establish a regulatory and governance infrastructure for immersive tech. I think that's on the project.
Great, thanks. Ed.
Hello, everyone. It's Edward Cole. I'm a background in financial markets, very much in and around the changes in the 80s and 90s into electronic trading, discovery, execution, settlements, and making all this very efficient. And also the whole business of sharing information conveniently to have a better understanding of where fair value is in the markets, which creates a lot of efficiencies in terms of margins and opportunity. I'm taking that, I see the Web3 as an example really of a trading marketplace, if you will, where we're trading private information in order to collaborate across markets. And so my business, Catalyst Technology, has some core technology and work with partners to provide what we see as the underpinning capability, the infrastructure which we think is missing today, that enables all these very smart technologies we've heard already this morning, whether it's quantum computing or whether it's artificial intelligence applications. It all relies, in our view, on an internet which is safe, secure, and accessible. And that's what our definition for Web3, and we provide technologies to support that.
Amazing, thanks all. So first questions first, as I said, we'll start by talking about just what these technologies are and crucially how humans are expected to interact with them in the workplace or in, through work. So maybe Vicky, can I start with you? And particularly interested in, what they are and also the link to what we would call metaverse.
Oh, the metaverse. Is it still alive?
That buzzword.
So I think there's a whole host of technologies, and as was put there, I mean, I really see this as the sort of underpinning infrastructure and technologies like Web3, blockchain and DLT infrastructure that will underpin the future of what immersive worlds might look like. I think we've seen some really rapid changes from the cyberspace visions from the 1990s through to the 2016 time period where new immersive hardware, virtual reality devices came out, very consumer focused, linked to games technologies that people could suddenly play at home. Now we're starting to move, the metaverse became a thing, and then spatial computing after that, I mean, or all at the same time, I'm not quite sure. But what we're seeing is a new vision of technology that I think is enabled by convergence. This is a vision that is virtual worlds that people can roam. It's a future vision of the internet where rather than looking at pages, we might explore spaces. And to enable the interaction between commerce and interoperability between different technologies, safety, security is really important. But I think thinking of technologies as they converge together to create the spatial internet is how we're thinking about it. And that's where the new business models will certainly come up.
Okay, and to be clear, when we talk about immersive technologies, we're talking about, as you mentioned, AR and
reality,
VR,
augmented
haptics as well,
Yeah.
so controllers and that you can, joysticks, that sort of thing, and then also holograms, holographics,
Yeah,
all
so
suites of.
for sure. And the thing that I think we're seeing changing is a new desire for thinking of the future to really be hands-on with our technologies. I think there's a desire to think beyond the screen and how we see the internet today, but actually start to really get hands-on. And that brings with it some really interesting policy implications. It's fantastic to see the new government really embracing wearable technologies across the government mission areas. So the NHS are now going to be looking at wearables to support with health, for example. But there's some really novel implications that come with that around data and the body that we can obviously get into, I'm sure, when we get into the conversation.
Brilliant, thanks. And Cami, I'm really interested. You've got a great project that you've been leading called Return to Reality. So can you tell us a little bit about that and the technologies that underpin that work?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned before, the purpose of the project really is to provide regulators with resources around both what immersive technology is, as well as what its societal implications are, so benefits and risks. This project came out of an understanding that following the sort of period that you were talking about, 2016, 2020, there was a lot of interests by regulators and policymakers around immersive tech. Specifically, we're focused on AR, mixed reality, VR, and immersive virtual worlds or metaverses. But this interest has waned a bit with the sort of surge of other technologies such as generative AI, et cetera. What we kind of have come to understand is that although there was an interest sparked back then, these technologies are continuing to be developed, although they haven't reached the sort of state of adoption maybe once forecasted. But the governance infrastructure to back up the development of these technologies isn't quite there. And so what we're looking to do is to provide resources to both increase the understanding of what the technologies are and increase an understanding of their impacts in a way that standardization, policymaking, regulation can be adjusted where needed to support the technologies being developed in a way that is beneficial and not harmful.
Sure, that makes sense. And Edward, we've spoken so far about things like wearables. So Vicky mentioned wearables, Cami mentioned AI, and the role of AI assistants in the workplace will only grow. Are you able to talk about how Web3 technologies may underpin the application of or adoption of these of other technologies?
Well, first of all, I think it's absolutely core to enable these technologies to be adopted safely. So I suppose key to immersive or technologies or these new technologies is that it's interactive, if you will. So we've got information coming from wearables going out, and we've got information coming in for it to be interactive. And that automatically assumes that the individual is going to be involved in this process, or robots or anything, or private information is going to need to be shared in order to be used for good purpose. But that data is as much the owner of the SME, the individual as a sole trader, or however you see it, as it is for a large organization to get access to that data in a private way, or even in a slightly different way. But they get big organizations using the web today are able to monitor your activities on the big applications, and they're able to learn from that, not always to your disadvantage. It's very unhelpful for the user, potentially, very unhelpful for the shopkeeper who's trying to, take advantage of the internet. And so the real world, the large part of interactive technologies is really to work with the user, to understand the user, to their personalized data, in a way that a car salesman might work with you in the actual real world to find out contextual information about whether what your family situation is, whether you've got a dog, whether you like to go to the racing. That information now is done online. And that's a conversation between you as a private individual or a business and the commercial world or the research units that are providing this service. And I think today that is no longer tenable in the way that data exchange is working. So what does Web3 offer if it's designed in the right way? This is a journey. Using these wonderful technologies like cryptography, how we express this is we want to see users, SMEs, with a self-sovereign digital twin, which can be used for a particular purpose. But a self-sovereign digital twin needs to be connected. It needs to be connected to a network, a private network that can operate with a public consensus, which is the sort of technologies we're talking about. And I'm not a coder, so I have limits myself. But I think the vision is very important to understand how we as individuals, users, and it's a word that hasn't been used a lot today, is how we're empowered with our data. So we're the gateway for our own data onto the internet, as opposed to be using third parties as the gateway that really have an advantage. So that's where we stand. So what we want to see, or what we're building, is a vision of self-sovereignty digital twins operating on a digital twin management system. I don't call it a blockchain system. Blockchain is a method of securing networks, if you will. I think it's the system, and we've heard this from Lord Valence today, it's about a whole system approach for delivering services. AI, quantum, etc., all require a certain respect which comes from the provenance of the data, how it's managed, how it's stored, and how it's shared across the internet.
Sure, okay. And I think there's an awful lot to unpack here. And just to say, please find our speakers in the lunch break directly after this if you want to ask more questions, because I'll have to move on, but there is a lot behind the technologies themselves. I'm interested to move on to the UK and to ask where we're currently succeeding in the development and adoption of these technologies that we've discussed. Maybe, Cami, I can come to you first. And are you able to give your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't speak directly to the development of immersive tech products to the UK specifically, but more broadly speaking, I think, kind of echoing what Vicky was saying earlier, we've seen a trend from this sort of moment of hype around immersive tech a couple of years back, where this technology hasn't necessarily been adopted in a sort of broad scale. However, it has been developed and been adopted across moving towards enterprise uses, and has been adopted in high impact industries, right? So we see this in education and training, we see it in healthcare, we see it even in military contexts, etc. We also know that when it does come to commercial uses, so not enterprise, a lot of the key users of this technology are children, for example. And the reason why I bring up the fact that the technology is, although not broadly adopted as, say, AI is starting to be and other technologies, it is present in both high impact industries and it's used by vulnerable users. And so what this means to us is that it is a technology that has quite a high degree of impact, and therefore technology that should be at the forefront of both thinking about how to make sure that its impacts are positive, but also at the forefront of regulation. Another thing to consider, just quickly, around it is that immersive tech works in convergence with other technologies often, and increasingly a trend that we're seeing is the convergence of artificial intelligence with immersive technologies, as you were mentioning earlier, the use of personal assistants, large language models, et cetera. So yeah, I think this is just a bit of context around the sort of bigger picture of immersive tech products, not necessarily UK specific. But that sort of in contrast where we are with UK specific policymaking, I will say that something that we will be encouraging through some of the outputs of our project is further emphasis on regulation and governance around the specific nuances that arise with the use of these technologies. We see, say, in the EU, a bit more of initiative around this. There was a EU citizens panel around virtual worlds. The EU Commission has a project around immersive tech, and we're not seeing that much, although there is work in standardization, we're not seeing that much activity in the UK specifically. So that's, I think, something to, move towards.
Sure. And I think just one point to pick out on that is very interesting. You mentioned children, and I think particularly you look at the success of Pokemon Go, the kind of viral AR game from a few years ago. It's the early adopters, children, young people who will be in the workplace of tomorrow that will already be well equipped with the tools to use AR, VR, etc. So I think that's a really interesting point. Vicky, I'm going to come to you, and I'm curious. So CoStar have a live lab project. Can you tell us a bit about that and a bit about what implications that might have for the future of work?
Yeah, of course. So in terms of the UK's success, just to draw on that, I think one of the things that Kemi mentioned was that the EU are doing a lot of work on what they're calling Web4 and virtual worlds. It's almost like formed a strategy to coalesce the ecosystem. We've got a fantastic ecosystem we have for a long time. The R&D landscape for immersive tech is fantastic. We've got R&D programs like immersive arts running at the moment, for example, in the creative sector. One of the things we are lacking is that vision. But this in part, I mean, we've got a lot of fantastic companies in the creative industries, largely small companies. So the adoption kind of point is covered. And the reason CoStar has been set up is to enable access to some of these technologies in labs and start to apply them and bring them all together. This was seen as a really big point. Creative industries as a sector are some of the early adopters of these kind of technologies, but they're equally the most impacted in terms of the ramifications, text and data mining being one example of some quite significant IP issues. But we wanted spaces for people to get hands-on with the tech. So the Live Lab has been developed at a place called Production Park in Wakefield, which is absolutely fantastic. It's a hub for someone at the back. Yeah.
We have a fan.
It's a fantastic space where they're really working with the next generation of people working across the creative industries, from lighting technicians through to technicians that are working in XR, pulling them all together to create the workforce of the future and really give that hands-on industrial experience. So that is kind of baked within the Live Lab itself. It's going to be based there. But the whole point of the Live Lab is to look at what are the future of live experiences. Each of the labs have virtual production kind of at their core, so they're going to be these big interactive screens. It's going to be sort of virtual cameras, so cameras that map into virtual spaces. This is being used a lot in the film industry at the moment. It means you can make Dune by not taking the whole Dune cast to the desert, but actually just filming it in a virtual production studio. But the whole landscape of the live experience is changing. If you've got kids that are using Roblox, for example, there's live performances in virtual worlds like Roblox where all these kids have avatars and they're dancing along to their favourite artists in Roblox. That almost qualifies, despite the fact it's not a sort of in-person experience, it's still very much live. It's happening in real time. It's using motion capture. So the Live Lab has been set up to not only support the skills workforce and understand where sectors and technologies are converging to produce new live experiences, but to really enable new companies to get hands-on with the technologies that will enable that as well.
Sure, that's really interesting. Edward, I'm just going to ask you about the quite a broad question here, but where does the UK sit when it comes to the Web3 ecosystem? Do you think enough of it is in place to enable workplaces of the future to adopt these technologies, or is there more to be done?
It's a great question, because the answer is no, really, from my perspective. I think this is a bit like digital infrastructure. Is a bit like, government getting involved in building canals, building motorways. It's proper infrastructure, and I don't think that's yet been done, or I don't know of. There's not so much. I don't have my fingers on all the pulses. I'd love to, but I have a vision that we do need government, public sector, to be involved in building a common open source infrastructure that takes the web, if you will, to the next level, so that public service can operate on it. Corporations, SMEs, everyone can access what is a digital capability, a digital marketplace, as I was saying earlier. So to example of the benefits of the safe system, so why it should be done. I mean, we saw Linux in previous generations, build an open source system. We think that there's a place there for almost another open Linux type blockchains scenario, as it were. So we would like to see government get involved in that and see the value of that. And part of the reason I'd like to see the government involved and see the value of that is we don't just want to use wonderful technologies to learn an awful lot at the very big global level, impact level, even though there's tremendous value in that. There's also tremendous value in the microeconomy, which is really how do people go about their business in a 0 hours, convenient, work from home, remote, smart type, almost, if you think about the comings and goings of a free port in the future, there's a wonderful world there, which is the microeconomy. And I think the online services and the safety of that communication is going to deliver the real value. I sort of slightly diverted from a theme. I do want to benefits of wearables and a safe internet, if you will. And you were talking about children on the internet, but actually one of the keys, or one of the key areas where I think government can benefit, is the use of, big challenge in the NHS is we haven't got enough GPs and we need to push, if you will, I was going to say almost farm out some of the responsibility to the pharmacies. We used to call them chemists, but and how do we do that? Well, we need to be able to monitor data from the individual using wearables. We need to be able to bring the pharmacy into what we call the referral pathway, if you will, which is a kind of supply chain of data. And we need the pharmacies to be able to, or at least a system to be able to do questionnaires remotely, which need to be safe. They need to be prescribed. You need to know the latest version. You need to know the source. There's a lot of information there, which is sort of supply chain related, which make for what is the jargon is an AI life cycle. But this all needs to be done in a smart way in order to bring the pharmacies into that treatment pathway and get access to only the data they need to get in order to make the decisions which they need to be involved in. And this is, when I say pharmacies, I also mean other treatment pathways, not all of them clinical, some of them, mental health issues, or, could be other areas. But all of this requires a safe internet. And I think it's missing today. And I think, there are tremendous benefits for UK productivity to take a real look at how we can build better networks.
Sure. Okay, that's really interesting. So Edward mentioned UK productivity. Now is probably the time to plug that I'm chairing another session later today on robotics, automation, and the implications for productivity. So stay around, please, and visit and listen to that. Vicky, I'm going to come to you and ask, we've kind of moved on to the final chunk of the discussion, which is government and what more it can do to support the sector. Where do you see the policy considerations in the Web3, immersive, metaverse space, kind of the key points that our new government should consider moving forward if we're to build this vision that we're talking about?
So there's a couple of things. I think, firstly, immersive and Web3 are still broadly on the horizon. There's a lot of innovation and R&D happening. The adoption's sort of increasing and the growth potential is high. I think immersive tech alone, I've noted, will be worth 5.4 billion in the UK by predicted by 2030. So I foresee that from a policy perspective, a lot of what will need to happen is an extension of what policies are already in existence. We can see things like online safety for children. The children are likely to be some of the biggest adopters of this stuff, right? And we need to take that seriously. It's very proximal when you're in a virtual world, for example, if we're talking about VR or AR. When you're physically close to someone, there's real implications there of sharing spaces. We've recently seen the emergence of the Office for Digital Identity. That's likely to take on a whole new guise if we're thinking of what Web3 will entail for digital identity. That means that, you know, everything will be stored in a way. What they're looking at the moment is how to better secure or certify certain providers that will look after certain elements of digital technology and make things more secure. But that's likely to change when things around the transactions that we're making, the skills that we have, the places that we work in, or multiple places that we work are all stored on a blockchain and things like that. And particularly from a workforce and skills perspective, I think there's going to be huge implications for policy there, and really thinking about how the curriculum can keep up with these kinds of technologies and training people that will build this stuff in the future. But I would also urge that we start to think about what the potential is with the outlined 5 mission areas. I think one of the beautiful things about immersive tech in many ways is that it's probably one of the more human-facing technologies, and can actually speak to some of the conversations that we were having earlier around social infrastructure and the opportunity in different places. It says something that all of the demos that are here today, or most of them, are VR experiences or AR experiences. It's because it's a friendly, you know, it's a way for people to sort of really engage in new forms of creativity. And I think that can speak to not only sort of boosting communities locally and working with schools and education providers and offering opportunities there, but it's also can support the NHS, public services, and speak readily to the growth mission if we are willing to sort of invest in the technology and continue R&D activity. I think the growth potential is certainly high.
Absolutely, and we at techUK are certainly calling for that attention and resource for the immersive and Web3 sectors, and we'll continue to do that. Brilliant. I'm going to ask Ed, where do data privacy and security come into all of this? Because it sounds to me like they're actually quite critical to doing this right, and particularly when we talk about the future of work, and we've got maybe sensitive personal data, and we've got, you know, some quite tricky implications. You've said maybe we're not quite doing enough in the UK at present. Is there anything that you'd love to see in this space to kind of get those issues right?
Well, certainly. I think it is absolutely core. I'm not one of the people who sees regulation always as a blocker to good, productivity. Actually, I think the EU AI Act is quite important, and it also motivates people to do things properly, which means design systems from the bottom up that will deliver the purpose. One of the technologies I don't know as much as I ought to know when I comment sometimes, but privacy enhancing technology allows large organizations, including, and I'm not going to, to basically analyze large amounts of data, perhaps with anonymity, there's privacy attached, but not with the knowledge of the individuals whose data it is. And that's becoming more of a common practice, to find ways of mining other people's data and say it's private. That's very useful if you're a large organization, and it's very useful if you're a government and you want to know a little bit more about how to drive policy. but it's not very good at actually sharing information with the individual, empowering the individual at the lower level. And privacy and consent really means it's not just the privacy, it's also the consent to access my data. To recognise there's a value in yourself, your personal IP, and to make it relevant to the workplace. We're all, in an organisation, we're all contributing something, not just to survive and get a wage, but also we're looking at technologies that help us to collaborate, to do the job better. That also involves speaking externally to your customers, etc., to understand what their requirements are, etc. So there's a sort of gathering of data, there's a combination of technologies, and they're using more immersive technologies perhaps in this environment to do what is effectively discovery, if you will. So where the privacy and the consent comes from how you manage your contribution, where you store your treasures, if you like, how you build your personal IP in your digital twin, if you will. And why by doing that is it more useful, not just to you, so you can have AI running across it, maybe advising you how you spend your hours during the day, or who might be convenient to see when, but I'll give you a case. I came to techUK a couple of days ago, and I attended the JES working group on how we could improve the criminal prosecution service. They have a massive problem with, and when there's a change, so there's a short of prosecutors or defenders or case managers, etc. And they need these people, this varies across the country. Some can be available remotely, some have to be on site. But whenever and they're already short-staffed and we've got a big backlog. So what they need to be able to do is the skilled, in terms of talent management, you need the individuals to actually show their talents, their skills, their credentials, have them verified. And also to be able to say what their fees are, to log when they're available, what the conditions are, so that the case workers can actually, when there's a change, can search the internet, find out who's most convenient, which is the most convenient Uber car, and suddenly, hopefully solve the problem. And also by having this, if you will, self-sovereign digital twin, you're able to, in terms of, you're able to show to the internet what your availability is, and the procurement marketplace for the individual talent becomes much more fluid. And that can work in the workplace. Instead of having to, at the moment, your CV sits in a PDF in your HR department and wasn't looked at until you last either changed jobs or some of that nature. Within a working environment, especially with people working from home, etc., you don't really know who's got the talent to solve a particular problem in the workplace that day. It could be specialist skills in PowerPoints or some other great skill, and you go out and hire somebody externally. You don't need them when perhaps that talent's available. I think, having a sort of almost a personal LinkedIn as opposed to a public LinkedIn would be a big contribution to enabling trust within in the workplace.
Sure, that's really interesting. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm gonna come to you, Cam. You've got about 5 minutes left of this discussion. So most of the attendees, out of interest, who in the room would describe themselves as part of industry, a tech company or a company working in the tech space? Just raise your hand. Brilliant. Okay, so that's probably most. And then government, civil service, regulators. Oh, all the back for some reason. Okay, nice. And then academia. Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, so as I thought, mostly industry. So we'll end with some kind of practical advice that hopefully is as helpful as possible. So Cami, what advice do you have for companies looking to make the most of this massive opportunity for the UK to lead on building the workplace of the future?
Yeah, definitely. I think, like I said earlier, most of the project is geared towards regulators and policymakers. It's actually a lot more regulators and policymakers than I expected, so that's great. But there are some things to obviously transfer over onto industry. One of the key things I would say broadly for both regulators and for enterprises is multi-stakeholder engagement and engagement with impacted communities when developing and adopting these technologies is key. And one of the things that we've actually done within the project is we did a participatory engagement with warehouse workers who might, in the future, not yet, there's very, very little use at the moment of AR in workplace, but it is something that has been posed and has been developed. And we wanted to evaluate with them some of the potential impacts to them, so benefits and risks as related to this technology. And we found some really interesting stuff. And the reason why I bring this up is because a lot of the sort of recommendations I can make could be quite broad, but actually when we do engagements with people that will be using this technology in the workplace specifically, there's some very contextually specific considerations that people need to take into account. So these were specific to a sort of warehouse context, but I do think that there is obviously some generalization to be made there. So some of the main considerations they mentioned and that we haven't yet published, so these are sort of preliminary findings, but some of the themes that we have at the moment include obviously issues of privacy. We understand that wearable technologies vastly increases the volume of data that is collected and also the sensitivity in a lot of cases. So workers were very much concerned in some cases around who gets to access that data, and specifically when thinking about existing power dynamics and dynamics between workers and managers in the workplace, right? So a lot of them were concerned, say, with how their performance might be differently evaluated based on a sort of huge increase of data accessed by their managers. So that's one thing to consider, both existing power dynamics in workplaces as well as just, again, the vast amount of data that will now be enabled to be gathered through the use of these technologies. Another important theme was that of accessibility. So making sure both the design of the technology and hardware and software itself is inclusive and accessible, both in terms of, say, language, but also just physical and mental accessibility considerations. And especially in a workplace context, this is important because employees' performance and evaluations in the workplace will be now contingent on their ability to use this technology, right? So there is a potential there for discrimination on the basis of not being able to use this. There is also obviously with that the issue of, or the topic rather, of training and how important that is, and to make sure that that is also an inclusive thing. The last, which I thought was super interesting, was the impact that using the technology might have on performance metrics. So as we've discussed, there is a potential here that technology increases productivity. And with that, naturally, also the same metrics. This was in the case of a warehouse, so it's processing times, et cetera, how many packages are packed, whatnot. With the increase of the performance metrics, there also needs to be considerations around worker well-being, health and safety, and also, again, how their data is collected for evaluation. So say if performance targets are going to be higher, does this now mean that workers are going to need to, exert themselves much more just to meet these? And I think particularly when thinking about workers in more precarious positions, so in this case, warehouse workers, 0-hour contract workers, et cetera, these are things to think about. These are some examples that are specific to this context, but what I really want to highlight with these, A, is that these will be themes that will come up as enterprises particularly adopt this technology. And B, it will be really important that in the process of doing this, workers are at the very least consulted, more ideally co-created with, to make sure that this is something that ultimately is beneficial for everyone in the business.
Amazing. Thanks, Cami. And I think a good point to flag, or good time to flag, that next month is techUK's 8th or 9th annual Digital Ethics Summit. Lots of these topics will come up there, but in a day of, similar to this, but with some really, really interesting speakers too. So I'd recommend checking that out on the techUK website. Brilliant. And so, Vicky, I'm going to come to you with the last question. Which is about what advice you have for companies looking to grow or scale in these sectors.
Ooh. Well, of course, coming from the R&D space, I would say get involved with new R&D programs and try out new things. I think we have a tendency in the UK to think of technologies in these buckets of AI over here and XR over here and whatever Web3 is and quantum over there. But I think we need to start seeing them as a toolkit that we can start to use. So think creatively about what your business is doing and how different technologies can enable that. And I think seeing how AI can work with XR, one of the things we didn't get onto, and I'm going to flag it because my old boss at Digital Catapult is in the room, but one really good example of tech convergence is a new lab has opened in Newcastle in the northeast in a shopping centre. That combines immersive and 5G, and it's literally been put there in a shopping centre so people working in different sectors can see how immersive and 5G capability can kind of work together to improve their manufacturing processes and different sectors. So I would start to see technologies as a toolkit to harness, and don't be afraid of immersive technologies. I think there's some exciting stuff that can be achieved.
Amazing. And I'm just going to ask in one sentence for each speaker to please, if you had one message you'd like to leave the audience with, just what would that be? Maybe Edward, I'll start with you.
One sentence.
One sentence.
I think the opportunity is vast. The technology is a huge enabler, and I hope that we use it for the power of the individual, not just for the power of the state.
Amazing. Thanks, Edward. Cami.
I think when it will be more than one sentence, it'll be very short. When it comes to immersive tech specifically, I think that making sure that there's policy that addresses known risks and there is an increase in public understanding will benefit. Not only will it ensure that the impacts are more on the positive side of things, but it will also help increase adoption of this technology because there will be more public trust around it.
Include immersive tech in more sort of policy and strategic approaches to tech. I think it's got a lot to offer, and I think we underplay our potential leadership role as the UK in this space.
Absolutely. Amazing. Well, just to end and say, please do check out the tech demos in the rooms just over there. Use BCVR's wonderful AR filter. The QR code is just as you go in on the left, or come to see me and I can share it with you. And you can share this event on your socials. And a huge thank you again to our fantastic panelists. So we're now breaking for lunch. You can exit these doors and turn left. We've got about an hour for lunch. It's in the members area and it's in rooms 3 and 4. So thanks.